The Life of Michael Jackson. This story was at first circulated in the 2009 interesting rendition dedicated to Michael Jackson. In case there had been any vulnerability, it completed on the evening of June 25, 2009, when the news broke that Michael Jackson had passed on of clear cardiovascular breakdown in Los Angeles at age 50. Less the events of Jackson's destruction, anyway there was chaos including that, yet rather the possibility of his life and legacy. The most impacting enunciation I heard came from an energetic individual of shading, Egberto Willies, whose self-chronicled video clarification communicated on CNN. "I grew up," Willies said, and halted a beat, on Michael Jackson. "I loved Michael Jackson. I hated Michael Jackson. I admired Michael Jackson. I was ashamed of Michael Jackson. I was sorry for Michael Jackson." What immediately came to be indisputable in all the incorporation is that paying little mind to the lack of respect that had chanced upon him, despite the most extremely terrible kinds of charges against him, despite his extravagances, his specific sensations of fear, his obvious pretension, or narcissism, and his postponed surrender of his art, the world really respected Michael Jackson for the music he made for more than 40 years. No single craftsman, without a doubt, no development or power, has obscured what Jackson achieved in the principal long stretches of his grown-up performance profession. Unmistakably, numerous different craftsmen have given us extraordinary craftsmanship, incredible shock, extraordinary creation and incredible revival, yet Michael Jackson changed the equilibrium in the pop world such that no one has since. He forced rock and roll and the mainstream press to acknowledge that the biggest pop star in the world could be young and black, and in doing so he broke down more barriers than anybody. There is no story in famous music as opportune yet as lamentable as the tale of Michael Jackson. The two fates ran for the duration of his life, pretty much all along. While still a youngster, he turned into the focal wellspring of help for a huge family and an endless resource for quite possibly the main record marks ever. Jackson profited with the entirety of that. He won notoriety and cash, and fostered a mental self-view that put him aside from nearly everyone. Michael's dad, Joe Jackson, was a crane administrator during the 1950s, in Gary, Indiana, a spot wherein, as indicated by Dave Marsh's Trapped, Michael Jackson and the Crossover Dream, amounts were forced on the number of dark specialists were permitted to progress into gifted exchanges the city's factories. Dark specialists were paid not exactly the white laborers, and furthermore endured a lot higher paces of deadly industry-related ailments. However, Joe Jackson held expectations that music would lift his life. Joe and Katherine were a youthful couple, hitched in 1949, and started a huge family right away. Michael and his siblings heard music all the time. They would do a portion of the extraordinary early Stone and Rollin' blues melodies by Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and so on. Michael wrote in his 1988 life account, "Moonwalk." Tito, similar to his dad, had a fast liking for playing instruments, and one day subsequent to recovering Joe's guitar to rehearse with his siblings, he broke a string. As Michael later reviewed, Joe whipped Tito for the infraction. He let him have it, then, at that point moved his child to show him what he could play. Maybe in those moments Joe Jackson saw a future hope blossom again. In spite of the fact that Joe was on a basic level a blues man, he liked that contemporary R&B, Motown and soul was the music that pulled in his children. Joe prepared Jermaine to be lead vocalist, yet one day, Katherine saw Michael, only 4 at that point, chiming into a James Brown melody, and Michael, in to his voice and moves, was at that point overshadowing his more seasoned sibling. He adored singing and moving, and in light of the fact that he was so youthful, a particularly startling vehicle for an animating, dead-on departiculation, he turned into a conspicuous mark of consideration when he and his siblings performed. There is no story in popular music as providential yet as tragic as the story of Michael Jackson. It's clear that Joe Jackson was good at what he did. He knew exactly what I had to do to become a professional, Michael later said. At the point when I discovered that my children were keen on turning out to be performers, I truly went to work with them, he read a clock in 1984. They got a little vexed about the entire thing initially in light of the fact that different children were out making some great memories. He assembled a shell around himself throughout the long term, and once he quit discussing our privately run company, he thought that it was difficult to identify with us. Around 1964, Joe started entering the Jackson siblings' inability challenges, a considerable lot of which they helpfully won. "This is a serious life for a 9-year-old, Katherine would remind her significant other, yet Joe was resolute. I used to remain in the wings of this one spot in Chicago and watch a woman whose name was Mary Rose," Michael reviewed. The most acclaimed sight on these visits was the Apollo in New York, where the Jackson 5 won an amateur night show in 1967. While on the circuit, Joe had come to know Gladys Knight, who was appreciating a line of little triumphs with Motown, America's pre-prominent dark pop name. With the support of both Knight and Motown R&B star Bobby Taylor, Joe took his children to Detroit to try out for the name. In 1969, Motown moved the Jackson family to Los Angeles, set them up at the homes of Diana Ross and the Marx proprietor, Berry Gordy, and started prepping them. Michael recollected Gordy advising them, "I'm going to make you the greatest thing on the planet." When he marked the Jackson 5, Motown had since a long time ago making the most of its status as the main dark-claimed and worked record name in America, generating the achievements of Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Temptations, Mary Wells, the Four Tops, and Diana Ross and the Supremes, among others. At that point, awesome music was progressively turning into a mechanism for collection-length works. On the other hand, Motown kept up hits anything but a plant that produced hit singles, in spite of pivotal collections by Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye. Gordy was searching for a singles-situated gathering that would convey hits for youngsters, however would likewise give them someone to seize as their own, to relate to and to love. Fred Rice, who might make Jackson 5 product for Motown, said, "I call them the Dark Beatles." The Jackson 5 characterized the change from 1960s soul to 1970s fly, however much Sly and the Family Stone did, and when numerous Americans were uncomfortable with minority desires to control, the Jackson 5 passed on a pleasant ideal of dark pride, one that reflected connection and goal instead of resistance. They addressed an acknowledgement that the social equality development made conceivable, and that couldn't have happened even 5 or 6 years sooner. Social pundit and artist Jason King, in an extraordinary exposition, as of late expressed, "It's anything but a distortion to say that he was the most exceptional mainstream artist of his age throughout the entire existence of recorded music." Fred Rice, who might make Jackson 5 product for Motown, said, "I call them the Dark Beatles." For in any event the initial not many years, Michael and his siblings appeared to be inescapable and delighted in all-inclusive commendation. The music they were making wasn't actually of development, they didn't compose or create it, and after Michael was consigned to recording legacy admission like Rockin' Robin? In 1972, he stressed that the Jackson 5 would turn into an oldies act before he left immaturity. The Jackson 5 began pushing to produce themselves and to create their own sound. Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye had exhibited a capacity to develop and change, and sell records, when given imaginative breathing space, and with 1974's Moving Machine, the Jacksons demonstrated they could flourish when they held on to a funk groove. Michael bided his time, studying the producers he and his brothers worked with. In 1975, Joe Jackson negotiated a new deal for his sons, this time with Epic Records, for a 500% royalty rate increase. The agreement likewise specified independent collections from the Jacksons, however the game plan did exclude Jermaine, who wedded Gordy's girl Hazel and remained with Motown, making a crack with the family that went on for quite a while. Motown attempted to obstruct the arrangement, and in the end prevented the siblings from utilizing the Jackson 5 name. The gathering would now be known as the Jacksons. Predetermination, however, was just an introduction. By the time the collection was done, Michael was prepared to roll out urgent improvements that would set up his command as an independent craftsman. Jackson liked the arranger's ear for mixing complex hard beats with soft overlayers. Jones carried an ethereal lightness to Jackson's delicate sensual fever on melodies like Rock With You and Don't Stop Until You Get Enough, and in a dazzling second like She's Out of My Life. Jones had the sound judgment to give Nothing Dark the glorious disaster access the vocalist's voice. The subsequent collection, Off the Wall, which set up Jackson as a developed imaginative power by his own doing, has the most brought-together feel of any of his works. Michael Jackson had in actuality gotten one of the greatest dark specialists America had at any point delivered, and he expected Off the Wall to win top distinctions during the 1980 Grammy Awards function. Jackson told Jones, and evidently others also, that his next collection wouldn't just be greater than Off the Wall, it would be the greatest collection ever. However, it became obvious quick that this was by and large what Jackson expected Thriller to be, a splendid assortment of tunes proposed as hits, every one planned in light of mass hybrid crowds. Jackson put out Billie Jean for the dance swarm, Beat It for the white rockers, and afterward followed every hybrid with tricky recordings intended to improve to his appeal and his detachment. However, in the wake of hearing these tunes track down their regular life on radio, clearly they were a more thing than excellent features. Billie Jean, meanwhile, uncovered the manners by which the association between the craftsman's popularity and the rest of the world may summon soul-killing shame. People consistently advised me, be cautious about what you do. 'Cause the untruth turns into reality, Jackson sings, potentially thinking about a paternity charge from some time back. Jackson had just performed a medley of greatest hits with his brothers. As his brothers said their goodbyes and left the stage, Michael remained. There are times when you realize you are hearing or seeing something exceptional, something that catches the deepest desires mainstream music may strive for, and that may join together and arouse another crowd. That opportunity arrived that evening, on TV screens the country over, seeing a young fellow marking out his region, and simply beginning to make a case for his legitimate pop legend. Almost 50 million people saw that show, Jackson wrote in Moonwalk. That was the last truly blessed moment in Michael Jackson's life. It's likely worth asking, what sort of individual was Michael Jackson around then? As yet, these inquiries haven't actually figured. Michael Jackson was an enormously capable young fellow. He appeared to be modest yet driven, and he positively appeared to be baffling. He did, however, describe himself as a lonely person, particularly around the time he made Off the Wall. Previous Los Angeles Times music pundit Robert Tilburn as of late composed of meeting Jackson in 1981, when the artist was 23, that Jackson struck him as perhaps the most delicate and forlorn individuals I've at any point met, practically deserted. When I asked why he didn't live on his own like his brothers, instead remaining at his parents' house, he said, "Oh, no, I think I'd die on my own." Jackson's social disquiet was presumably shaped by the injuries in his set of experiences. The kids were protected from mothers their age, and Jackson's status as a deep-rooted star may have left him feeling cut off from a great many people, yet additionally outsider from them, as though his experience or his job made him phenomenal. At the same time, it's a statement full of signals. Jackson didn't enjoy the sort of company that might guide him in positive ways. Perhaps the most alarming section in Moonwalk is the point at which he discusses youngsters in the amusement world who in the long run succumb to drugs. I can comprehend, considering the huge burdens put upon them at a youthful age. In any event, Michael Jackson seemed clearly reputable, eminent though not heroic, not yet messianic, and certainly not contemptible. Thrill Ride put 7 singles in Billboard's top 10 and furthermore turned into the greatest-selling collection ever, as of now around 50 million duplicates or more, and at the 1984 Grammy Awards, Jackson at last asserted his due, catching 8 honors, including Album of the Year and Record of the Year. Then, months later, it was announced that Michael would be setting out on a nationwide tour with the Jacksons. Jackson's repugnance for the Victory Tour was evident when he sat looking hopeless at public interviews or when he needed to reprove explanations by his dad that he deciphered as projecting slanders in the Jacksons' supervisory crew of Ron Weisner and Freddie DeMann. "There was a time," Joe said, "when I felt I needed white help in dealing with the corporate power structure at CBS." The mid-1980s was a time when many in the music press had misgivings about mass popularity, especially if it seemed to represent a homogenized or acquiescent culture. Michael Jackson, after all, wasn't an artist with a message of socio-political revolution, nor did his lyrics reflect literary aspirations. He wasn't, it's anything but, a craftsman who might achieve for his crowd what Elvis Presley and the Beatles achieved for theirs, the kind of occasion or disturbance that changed both youth culture and the world. To me, Michael Jackson, Presley and the Beatles all come in one ideals. They bound together huge number of in any case different individuals in an eccentricity of shared taste, yet additionally a powerful, ardent agreement that addressed normal dreams and qualities. The racial dimensions of Jackson's image proved complex beyond any easy answers at that time, or even since. Be that as it may, what likely enlivened these race-related contentions most, the territory where they all appeared to work out, was the geology of Jackson's face. With the exception of later accusations about his sexual behavior, nothing inspired more argument or ridicule about Michael Jackson than that face. The face Jackson displayed on the cover of Thriller had changed, the skin tone seemed lighter and his nose thinner and straighter. In Moonwalk, Jackson asserted that a significant part of the clear redesign was because of an adjustment of his eating regimen. He confessed to changing his nose and his jawline, yet he denied he'd done anything to his skin. To a few, this all turned out to be reasonable game for criticism. To other people, it's anything but an odd mutilation, not on the grounds that it may have been a demonstration of vanity, intended to keep his face always youngster-like, however more troublingly in light of the fact that some trusted Jackson needed to change himself into a white individual. The film Three Kings has a popular scene where an Iraqi investigative specialist asks a caught American warrior, "What is the issue with Michael Jackson?" "A black man make the skin white and the hair straight, and you know why?" In 1985, James Baldwin wrote in an essay for Playboy, "The Michael Jackson cacophony is fascinating in that it is not about Jackson at all. I hope he has the good sense to know it and the good fortune to snatch his life out of the jaws of a carnivorous success. He won't quickly be excused for having turned such countless tables, for he damn sure snatched the medal ring, and the one who burned through every last dollar at Monte Carlo has nothing on Michael." Michael Jackson unquestionably needed to hold on to the ring twice. He needed his next collection to be greater than Thriller, which was obviously a lot to inquire. He had for some time been instructed, by the To His Dad and Motown, that the press was a pernicious power when it came to performers, that it delighted in the cadence of building a superstar's picture, just to pivot and subvert that equivalent individual. More regrettable, a lot of it came from journalists and tattle editorialists, even political observers, who showed nearly nothing if any genuine appreciation for Jackson's music and little regard for the sheer virtuoso of his work. At that time, Jackson's art was still his best way of making a case for himself. If not as eventful and ingenious as Off the Wall and Thriller, Bad was as good as any album he ever made. It was rigid and astounding, it had snap and fever, it emanated fury and self-indulgence, yet additionally longing for beauty and amazing quality, especially in Men in the Mirror, a melody about tolerating social and political obligation, and about the craftsman arranging his way back into the world. Jackson then staged his first solo tour later that year. On a few evenings, I saw him turn in rousing exhibitions that likewise filled in as opportune tokens of an occasionally ignored truth about him, namely that whatever his unconventionalities, Michael Jackson gained his distinction basically in view of his astoundingly natural abilities as a vocalist and artist, gifts that were authentic and inimitable and not the developments of simple aspiration or publicity. Certainly nobody else broke open their moment in one daring physical display like Jackson. In the initial pieces of melodies like Terrible and The Way You Make Me Feel, he appeared to be unsure and stressed, pulling off the tune's childish idea of streetwise sexuality, and his exaggerated hip-hops and groin-grabbing put on a show of being more constrained than felt. Jackson turned out to be out of nowhere certain and pulled off alarming, mechanical hip and middle pushes close by a lethargic movement, sliding emulate moves that left the crowd heaving. In 1988, he was again nominated for key Grammy Awards including Album of the Year, but he was up against hard competition. Artists like U2 and Prince had fashioned the most ambitious and visionary music of their careers, music that reflected the state of pop and the world in enlivening ways. In the Rolling Stone Readers' Survey, Jackson sat first in 6 of the Peruser's most noticeably terrible of the year classifications, counting most noticeably terrible male vocalist. Also, the Village Voice critics poll neglected to specify Jackson's Bad in its choice of 1987's 40 best collections. This was a startling turnaround from 4 years before, when Jackson and his work topped the same polls in both publications. It's anything but where he carried the world to him, or if nothing else that piece of the world he appeared to think often about, which chiefly included youngsters, individuals, he said, he felt generally comfortable with, since some portion of him needed to experience and share the youth he felt his dad and amusement vocation had denied him of. In 1993, a story broke that Jackson was accused of molesting a 13-year-old boy with whom he had kept frequent company. It was during that time that, according to some, he developed a dependency on medications that stayed with him through the rest of his life. Presley has never spoken negatively of Jackson, only affectionately, saying in the days after her ex-husband's death that she left him only because she felt she couldn't save him from himself. Jackson married again in 1996, this time to a nurse from his dermatologist's office, Debbie Rowe. The couple had 2 children, son Prince Michael Jackson and daughter Paris Michael Katherine Jackson. Be that as it may, notwithstanding great minutes, and such a large number of treacly and cocky ones, Michael Jackson's 1990s music had no genuine presence in the continuous current of mainstream society. His last collection, Invincible, from 2001, yielded a couple of courageous tracks. Jackson was at long last obliging the expressive and social advancements made by hip bounce and other metropolitan music structures, yet in general it wasn't sufficient to satisfy its title. It is not necessarily the case that Michael Jackson was not, at this point, an immense star, yet rather that his legend had changed. He was presently known for his abundances and terrible decisions. In some cases you needed to keep thinking about whether Jackson had any genuine thought how his activities struck the world, which is maybe okay, except if you anticipate that the world should cherish you unequivocally. During one point in the transmission, Jackson sat holding the hand of a 13-year-old kid, a malignancy survivor, and clarified what he saw as the blameless and cherishing nature of that conduct. The public reaction was quick and exacting. Many idea that in spite of the allegations he had looked in 1993, Jackson could in any case go about as he needed without risk of punishment. The controversy became as serious as possible when the boy in the video accused Jackson of fondling him. The repulsive show that Jackson had arrived in was with regards to the predominant topics of his life and craftsmanship, his fixations on fame, secret, hubris, dread and plundered youth. If the charges were true, one had to wonder what Jackson truly saw when he looked at the childhoods of others. The trial was a farce. It's dismaying the case ever made it to trial, and Jackson was acquitted on all charges. Jackson walked out of the courtroom that day a shaken, listless man. It's hard to believe that Jackson, who was so proud of his public performances and so peerless at delivering them, would have committed himself to a project in which he might fail so tremendously. At the same time, it is not inconceivable that Michael Jackson could have been a man half hungry and broken in the past few years. All that is certain is that on June 25, in Los Angeles, Michael Jackson met the only sure redemption he might know, in the most famous unexpected and mysterious death in current history. That redemption didn't come because he died, but because his death forced us to reconsider what his life added up to. What killed Michael Jackson? He pushed too hard, wanted too much, he didn't recognize limitations. That subject of child molestation will always, of course, be a crux concern about his life, one that, for many people, clearly, and understandably, trumps his art. That is, after his death? At the point when someone makes as much extraordinary music as Jackson did, our aggregate delights are enhanced and our set of experiences is made more extreme and complex. In his aspirations, in his difficulties and generally significant, in his sounds, he exemplified dark music history in America. It is consistently great to see someone changing the universe of known potential outcomes. I recollect, in my first year as an author on the staff of Rolling Stone, watching the Sex Pistols break old surfaces and yield another future, even as they sang of no future in front of an audience at San Francisco's Winterland, during their last 1970s execution. Michael Jackson didn't simply get the gold ring, he snared it's anything but another bar and set it considerably higher, and no one has yet grabbed it with a remarkable same style or results.